to Obskur. Tonight we peel back the veil of the mundane to find the nightmares hiding in plain sight. Our first story, Static on Channel 0. They say that houses remember. They say that every floorboard creak and every shadow in the corner is just a memory trying to find its way back into the light. After my grandmother passed away, I inherited her Victorian home on the outskirts of Blackwood. It was a place of heavy curtains, dust motes dancing in the sun, and a silence so thick you could almost feel it on your skin. The house was filled with relics, but the one that bothered me most was in the guest room. It was an old Zenith television, a massive, boxy gray beast from 1992. It sat on a heavy oak stand, its glass screen staring like a blind, dead eye. My grandmother never used it. In fact, she had draped a heavy lace cloth over it, as if she were trying to hide a secret. The first few nights were quiet, but on the third night, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavy, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. I woke up at exactly 3:33 a.m. The house was silent, but then a hum started. It was low at first, a vibration in the floorboards that I felt in my teeth. I followed the sound to the guest room. The door, which I had clearly shut before bed, was wide open. And there it was. The Zenith was alive. The screen was a frantic storm of white noise, full-blast static that sounded like 1,000 angry hornets. I reached for the power button, but I stopped dead. I looked down at the base of the TV. The power cord was sitting there on the hardwood floor, curled like a dead snake. It wasn't plugged in. It couldn't be on. And yet, the room was bathed in a flickering, sickly blue light that made the shadows on the walls pulse and stretch. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of residual charge, a freak electrical anomaly. But as I stared into the static, the snow began to settle. It started to form shapes. First, the outline of the bed, then the dresser, and then I saw myself. The screen showed the room from a high angle, like a camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. There I was, standing in front of the TV, looking confused and terrified. But something was wrong. On the screen, the door behind me was closing. In the real world, the door was still open. I didn't dare turn around. I kept my eyes locked on that glowing glass. On the screen, a pale, spindly hand began to emerge from the darkness beneath the bed. The fingers were impossibly long, the skin looking like wet gray parchment stretched over sharp bone. It moved with a twitchy, unnatural speed, sliding across the carpet toward the me on the screen. I tried to move, but my boots felt like they were nailed to the floor. I watched as the hand on the screen grabbed my reflection's ankle. At that exact moment, a jolt of absolute freezing cold wrapped around my real leg. It was a grip of iron. I let out a jagged breath, my heart seizing in my chest. I looked down, terrified of what I'd see. But my floor was empty. There was no hand, only the phantom sensation of being held by something from another dimension. When I looked back at the screen, my reflection was gone. The room on the TV was empty. And then, the perspective began to change. The camera on the screen started to rotate. It turned slowly, with a sickening grinding sound coming from the TV's speakers, pivoting toward the very spot where I was standing. Suddenly, the TV didn't just turn off, it imploded. The glass didn't shatter outward, it sucked inward with a violent crack. Total darkness swallowed the room. In the sudden silence, I felt a hot, rancid breath on the back of my neck. I saw a reflection in the darkened window. Standing right behind me was a tall, distorted figure. It had no eyes, no nose, just a mouth. A wide, jagged, wet grin that stretched from ear to ear, filled with too many teeth. It leaned closer, its cold lips almost touching my ear, and whispered a single word that has haunted my every waking hour since.
Story number 2. The highway that wasn't there. There is a stretch of road in West Virginia, somewhere between the jagged peaks of the Appalachians, that you won't find on any modern GPS. Local truckers call it the Needle. It's a narrow 2-lane strip of asphalt that seems to swallow the light of your high beams. Last October, I was driving home from a late shift job in Charleston. It was 2 a.m., and a thick, unnatural fog began to roll over the hood of my car. My GPS started spinning wildly, the blue arrow circling as if it had lost its mind. I should have turned back. But on that road, once you enter the fog, there is no turning back. The trees on either side of the road didn't look like oaks or pines anymore. They were tall, skeletal things, their branches interlocking above me like the ribs of a giant. I realized I hadn't seen another car for miles. No gas stations, no road signs, just the endless, rhythmic thumping of my tires against the cracks in the pavement. Thump, 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 thump. Then I saw him. Standing on the shoulder of the road was a hitchhiker. He was wearing a yellow raincoat despite there being no rain. He was facing away from me, his thumb extended. As I passed him, a chill swept through the car, a cold so intense it frosted my windshield from the inside. I checked my rearview mirror. The road was empty. The man in the yellow coat was gone. 10 minutes later, I saw him again. Same yellow coat, same position, facing away. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I didn't slow down. I pushed the needle to 80, my engine screaming in the silence, and then I saw him for the 3rd time. But this time, he wasn't on the shoulder. He was standing right in the middle of my lane. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching, smoke filling the cabin. I stopped just inches away from him. My breathing was ragged. For a long minute, he didn't move. Then, very slowly, the man in the yellow raincoat began to turn around. He didn't have a head. The raincoat was empty at the top, just a jagged hole where a neck should be. But from inside the collar, a voice came out. It wasn't one voice. It was hundreds of voices, all screaming at once, muffled as if they were trapped under miles of water. The car's radio snapped on, blaring at maximum volume. It wasn't music. It was the sound of a car crash, metal twisting, glass shattering, and a woman screaming my name. I threw the car into reverse, my eyes blurring with tears of pure terror. I floored it, driving backward into the fog until I felt a violent jolt. My eyes snapped open. I was parked on the shoulder of the main highway, 5 miles from my house. My car was off. The sun was starting to rise. I thought it was a dream, until I looked at my passenger seat. Lying there, neatly folded, was a soaking wet yellow raincoat. And written in mud on my dashboard were the coordinates to a cemetery I had visited once as a child. The date underneath the coordinates was tomorrow's date. Our final story for tonight: The Shadow in the Frame. My grandfather was a man who collected secrets. After he passed away, I inherited his Victorian estate, a house filled with heavy velvet curtains and rooms that hadn't seen a human being in decades. In his study, tucked behind a wall of forbidden books, I found a silver-framed mirror. The frame was made of darkened silver, carved into intricate vines that looked like clutching fingers. The glass was strangely cold, even for a winter night. I moved it to my bedroom.
That was my first mistake. The first few nights were quiet, but the atmosphere changed the moment that mirror arrived. I felt a constant prickling sensation on my neck. When I looked into the mirror, the reflection was perfect. Too perfect. The dust in the real sunlight didn't exist in the reflection. My messy bedsheets appeared perfectly smooth in the glass. The candle on my desk burned with a steady flame, even when a draft made the real flame dance. It was as if the mirror wasn't reflecting my world, but showing me a frozen, ideal version of it. On the fifth night, the horror began. I was glancing at the mirror through the open bathroom door. In the dark hallway behind my reflection, I saw a movement, a flicker of something gray and tall. I spun around, but the hallway in the real world was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, my blood turned to ice. The figure was there. It was standing at the edge of the frame, partially hidden by the reflection of my door. It was impossibly thin, its skin like wet ash. It had no eyes, only deep, bottomless pits that seemed to drink the light from the room. I stood frozen. The figure in the mirror didn't move. It just existed there. I grabbed a heavy blanket and threw it over the mirror. But as the fabric settled, I felt something that shattered my sanity. From the other side of the glass, a solid, heavy hand pressed back against the blanket. It wasn't trying to push the blanket off. It was simply resting its palm against mine, separated only by wool and a sliver of silvered glass. I didn't sleep. Around 4 a.m., the whispering started. It was a dry, scratching sound coming from behind the mirror, a voice that sounded like my grandfather's, but distorted and slowed down. "Let me back in, Elias," it hissed. "It's so cold on this side. Let me back in." I approached the mirror, my legs shaking. I reached for the blanket, but then I looked at my own shadow on the wall. My shadow wasn't moving with me. It was standing still in the center of the room, its head tilted at a broken angle, watching me. I ripped the blanket away. The mirror was no longer reflecting my room. It was a window into a nightmare. I saw my house, but it was dead. The walls were peeling like dead skin, and the floor was damp black soil. Standing in that reflected hallway were hundreds of them, ash-skinned figures with hollow eyes, all staring at me. The one in the front stepped forward. It touched the glass from the inside. The surface rippled like water. A gray, decaying finger poked through the mirror and into my world. I smelled wet earth and rot. Driven by panic, I grabbed a heavy brass lamp and swung it. The mirror shattered. The sound was like a bomb, followed by 1,000 overlapping screams cut short. Silence returned. I spent the night cleaning up every shard and threw them into the furnace. I thought I had closed the door. The next morning, the sun was shining. But as I passed the living room window, I stopped. I looked at my reflection in the window pane. I was standing there, but in the reflection, I was screaming in silence. My reflection's hands were pressed against the glass, leaving bloody smears. Behind the me in the window, the ash-skinned figure was leaning over my shoulder, its jagged teeth bared in a grin. I realized then, I didn't break the mirror to keep him out. I broke it and trapped myself inside. And now, I am the one waiting for someone on the other side to let me back in.